All right, welcome back. This is another Heel Talk segment. And again, I wanted to do a part two around imposter syndrome. I want to say about a month and a half ago, I did an imposter syndrome with the one and only Growfessor. And as I was thinking about doing a part two of this segment, I wanted to I wanted to go and hit it a little differently, and I wanted to bring another party in, of course, bring someone familiar to this segment. So today, I have two amazing guests, and the name of the segment today is called Becoming Who You Are, Part Two. The Imposter is Gone. So, that kind of title, I had to bring two powerful folks in the room. And today, I have Rosina, the wonderful therapist based out in Colorado, therapy that looks like me, who have you seen in a few gems already. And of course, we have the Growfessor coming through. So come up to the room, y'all. Come up to the room. You know what we're doing today. We have a good time here to cook up. I have some questions for you. As y'all know, I put some questions in the chat before we started to hit the record. So I want to just get at this since, this is a topic that I feel there was a reason why I wanted to bring you two together. And I feel like the overlap of knowledge and thoughts would just be really beautiful and tangible for the audience. So to get this going, let's go ahead and start with the first question. And the first question goes, how do we speak to our inner child when doubt takes the mic? Who would like to start?
And so when I think about, like imposter syndrome and just where we are with our inner child, right? Like I think doubt itself sounds a lot like the voices of whether it's teachers, mentors, family members, just all these different people, right? But doubt often sounds like an amplification of all the negative messages, right? That over time we've then internalized, right? And I think they kind of sum themselves up into that core statement of like, not enough, or I'm not the right kind of enough, right? And so when we start looking at like what it takes to begin to speak to our inner child, I think part of that journey is helping to connect ourselves to the language of self compassion, right? Which we don't speak enough about self compassion because I think as communities of color, self compassion is something really abstract, right? Like it sounds really different to like give yourself the kindness that you so readily give to others, right? But it's giving yourself really truly that permission to just take up space. And I like to say it's like kind of taking that putty out of a container and putting it down on the table and just letting it spread out. And it's saying like you don't have to shrink anymore, you don't have to contain yourself anymore. Like you belong, you're enough. It could sound like affirmations, like you're not broken for being sensitive or outspoken. It's just it's who you are in this time, and when you do that way, you are reclaiming your power. That is your power, right? And it's creating, I think, also like a softness and a tenderness like within ourselves that I think it serves and can serve as a reminder that like we're not only survivors of the things that have happened to us and kind of learning to overcome those negative narratives, but we're also then giving ourselves to move into a position where we can then inherit the joy, right? The happiness, the peace, right? All these things that so many of us say that we're looking for, especially in a time and in a world right now where so much is just upside down. Like we need to also recognize we're surviving, but we're also thriving and inheriting, right? Like the things that we've lost. And so I think it's about giving a younger version of ourselves that opportunity to just like be loved unconditionally, um and to experience like a pride, a satisfaction, and even right, like we even talk about safety, I think, when it comes to like working with our inner child. And safety is something, it's very special and very sacred to each and every one of us in the way that we construct it. And so I'm gonna put my pin there.
Look, I love everything about your pen because my work starts and at the making of the pen,
Mm.
which is called conditioning. And so
Mm.
my model is called deconditioning. And so to me, the heart of imposter syndrome sits right there. And I think that the word and the way the term comes up with faulty research in itself kind of took a storm of its own,
Mm.
and black women by and large adopted it as some calling card, and then it permeated itself sort of further from there. But I think if you interrogate the research that was done, you see gaps in the who that they
Mm-hmm.
was actually doing the research on. Then you also see the gaps in the inclusive nature of the data, which is what lens did we look at? If we only looked at it from the lens of my comfort, my privileges, obviously I'm going to put no stock in these, so I'm going to call stuff imposter,
Yep.
right? One, there's no such thing as an imposter human, right? You are who you are, right? So when I think about deconditioning, for me, it's about making sure of getting folks to, in order for me to reclaim what your work is going to look like and whatever those practices are, you have to first be able to see just that you have stuff that you didn't create, that you didn't sort of accept on your own. You didn't sort of have this fair evaluation to say, okay, y'all gave me 5 options and then I chose this. No, you got the one that they gave you, right? And so for me, it's so important to unpack imposter syndrome from the root cause to everything you said, Rosina, which is it shows up in all of these little places, teacher, this, that, or that. But they're the root cause of something you heard in your earliest stages, whether it was home, whether it was somebody else's shortcomings that they said out loud so much that you sort of interpreted. You think about our parents didn't even know nothing about corporate America and anything about technology and any of this. But the mindset they gave us is you go to work and you put the head down and somebody's going to tap you on the shoulder. So like that right there, somebody now goes to starts to think that, well, if they told me this is what success looks like, and I'm doing this and I'm not being successful, I must not be something, right? So that version of not enough that you talked about, again, it goes back to these fundamental definitions of how we see things and how we frame things, not realizing that there's a part of your actual growth journey that you have what you have because it's needed for you to be covered wherever you are. And
Yep.
as you move, you go through. Look, a butterfly, again, think about the butterfly, that cocoon has to sit there, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there's a part where it's vulnerable, so whoever can get through it. There's some animals who can't. There's some animals who can, right? So it's not like it's just there in full protection, right? It is a protective measure, but they go in there going, I have one job to do. I have to come out of this, right, in my new form, right? And so for me, deconditioning is that it's getting folks to sort of think about that ecosystem by which they come from as the founding point of we got to step on top of this in a sense of you need to be able to see it
Mm-hmm.
for yourself that it wasn't even yours, it was given to you. And now you have the authorship, the sovereignty to decide what this looks like forward. So I love every place where you came with that. Like I said, mine is the creation of the pen. So
Look, you like it. I love it.
yeah, we in there.
But it made me think of a couple things. One, it made me think, and this goes back to what I shared with y'all before I hit record of just kind of why I wanted to do this segment, right? And I'm feeling both of what y'all said, but one thing that really resonated with me is part of our some of our past journeys that we had no control over, right? Maybe ages infant to 4 or 5, right? Where I struggle remembering things from six under. Like it's hard
Mhm.
unless they're pinnacle, like big things, right? But in saying that, right, knowing that between that age time and that frame, do you believe that some of those things that might pop up that we can't remember, we forgot, that might pop up and create some of those models that are narratives, let's say narratives that start coming out and almost coming out in a form of healing,
Mm-hmm.
self-healing, right? Or maybe even more like trying to keep themselves alive, or maybe like I'm kind of going to that extreme, right? And just the word is missing me here, but do you both feel that that can create some of that coming up, so then it becomes where that person can't get out of that cycle, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because they don't know where it's coming from. It's so farly removed from their memory, from right. It's not deeply rooted anymore because it's so removed. I can go on and on, but any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I think about, so when I think about deconditioning, it's starting from the place you are at. You won't get to the root right away, right? So it's not about you going back to ground zero. It's about where does this most show up immediate right now? Where
Yeah.
do I feel this tension right now? Because this is more immediate. Maybe it shows up in my relationship with my kids. Maybe it shows up in how I show up in work. Then, as you start to explore that, you're asking the questions of where might I have gotten this behavior from? Where might I have been exposed to this thing? And so then we get into the classic nature versus nurture conversation, which is it's not a nature versus nurture or nature or nurture. I like the epigenetics of it. It is both. Both are at play, right? And so if I think about my first 7 years of being homeless, I had no control over that, right? I went wherever. But if you look at my career, if you look at my life, I have already lived in 7 different places and I got sights on living somewhere else, right? So I didn't grow up with this sense of 30 years in the same house because that's where my parents grew up. They had all their kids and right. I had no attachment to something like that. And so while nobody explicitly told me to kind of have this wandering spirit, it was in that journey that wandering spirit, something that was like, oh, this fits. I'm good at making friends. So like I learned all these, my peopling, there's no doubt in my mind that there were some things that was happening there that I just was sort of natural to. It doesn't mean I embraced being homeless or I did any of those. I know nothing about nothing. But I knew that we was always changing where we was living, right? And so it wasn't until I started my own therapy journey and we started going by, well, why were you moving so much? Chicago's the first place, which is where I was homeless. That's the first place I moved to in my entire journey, which is where I live at now. First time I moved someplace and I wasn't going, oh, I know I'm moving soon. Like me wanting to move now is about I want to have a place outside of the U.S., right? And on the continent of Africa. So that's a separate, purposeful, intentional versus the rest of them. It was anyway the wind blowing because I was comfortable with moving.
No, and you touched on, right, like, so I get in my theory nerd a little bit. This goes a little bit into like social learning theory.
That's right.
That we learn by what we watch and we imitate and then we model the behavior, right? And so and I think over time, right, like what also goes into that is like our adaptive versus our maladaptive, right? So the things that like are helping us to be a part of environments, and then the negative things that we turn to cope when we're not able to deal with like what's happening in our environments. And so all of these come through observation, they come through reinforcement, they come through like how our minds are processing it and the thoughts we start putting behind it, and then of course the environments that we're in. And I think the environments, for the most part, like for most of us growing up, we had a lot of different negative influences that really, all of us right here, we're all probably like one decision, one choice, one experience, one away, right, from being right on the other side of the spectrum. Absolutely. Right. And I think all of us,
for a long period of time, there was one
that part. And so, we make these choices, right? And I think that's the beautiful part of like where the social learning theory kind of puts us, because we've touched on like resilience. I remember in one of our other healing talks, and the survival strategies that we kind of tap into that goes across like generations. And we're really, I think, at the very tip of what we're talking about when we start getting into some of these intergenerational things. But all of this, right, like is where some of that social learning lives. And I think it's giving us this space where we can explore it and talk about it and be with it very different, because now it's about like, how do I want to be able to do it differently? Right? Because I think this is the space that we into that I know I get excited about, because it's really showing us in some way that social learning is actually a mechanism that makes healing contagious. Right. And if those of us, right, like heal people, just like we say, hurt people.
That's right.
Heal people can heal people. And so when we're modeling these healthier ways of doing things, coping and boundaries, and just embracing like this vulnerability in all of our perfectly imperfect ways, right, we're giving other people that permission to do the same. And so, yeah, I get so excited when we start talking about this, because we're not stuck where we start. We're only stuck where we choose to stop.
Well, and I think this is what gets into interesting that you talk about, because to me, when you talk about social learning, the fundamentals of social learning was white man sociology and psychology, right? In terms of framing, right? And so even as we start to sort of frame away from that to be more inclusive in our thinking, to say, well, sure, you said that, but what was socially acceptable there was not socially acceptable in this space. So even when we talk about maladaptive behaviors, the context of maladaptive, if you're calling my maladaptive behavior me surviving, Guys, I'm not ever gonna see that. That's bad. I don't care
Right,
what I don't care what
right.
you talk about, right? And so when we think about this in the nature versus nurture conversation, right? You think about, you see folks on safaris, or you see folks trying to interfere with nature. I don't want this bear to eat this deer because I think this deer is nice. This bear's got one mindset: survival. I
Uh-huh.
got to kill that
Hungry.
to eat, right? And so when we think about maladaptive behaviors, you would look at nature and say, well, there's a bunch of maladaptive behaviors, but that
Mhm.
maladaptive behavior is central to survival. Default to figuring out how to survive, if that's what, because if
Mm.
I don't survive, none of it, and it
Yeah,
doesn't make sense. Because
yeah.
what am I doing it for, right? So
Right. No, and I love
Right.
that you're saying all that, like, that's all being done under, right, like the environment from which we're coming from.
that's right. That's right.
Yeah.
Which makes it hard to
And
disassociate from it.
Oh, that part. That part.
yeah. And for what, there's layers into what you were saying. We could have went down a few hallways.
That's absolutely right. That's why I was like, let me get y'all. That's why I was like, let me get y'all some room to cook.
Yeah, it's solid. There was like three doors. I was like, oh, we can go some different directions. But just to bring it back, it made me think too, just like, and I was going to go into the next question, but it made me think of another thought. And that is, I initially spoke of maybe memories, trauma that I couldn't remember, age 1 to 5. I didn't touch on, the stuff I saw in that age to my
That's
mother,
right. That's right.
right?
That's right.
She was a victim of domestic violence at the time through my father, and I
Mhm.
had to witness that, right? So it made me think of what you were both sharing, and some of the maybe of those doors I was seeing pop open. Is my mom obviously didn't have these kind of conversations to even recognize any of this, right?
That's
And
right.
then there's me at that 1 to 5 age having these things popping up later in my life, but not knowing it, right? So I just
Mhm.
wonder, like, in terms of my children,
Yeah.
because there's this, right? It's that cycle that you want to kind of end, and it's not really a circle cycle. I feel like it's an eight,
Mhm.
almost like an eight cycle, right? Any thoughts on that before we go to and I'll give this like 3 minutes for us just to chat on, but it just made me think of the trauma that I witnessed through my mom that might pop up and give me different reactions. Even maybe some proactions of fear of something she went through that may be popping up that I forgot about a long time ago, right, Rosina? That I'm like, oh,
Mhm. Mhm.
that's coming up. Or maybe it was a fear she had that somehow I obtained,
Absolutely.
right? All that stuff. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, as you said that, Adam, I couldn't help but think, like, when our parents, right, because I have a very similar background and just, seeing domestic violence and all of that. And so, like,
Mm,
in that time, we're dealing with like our parents who, in many ways, are just kind of emotionally truncated. Like, they did not have emotions available to them, and emotions were a luxury to be able to have and to express, right? It was not a thing. And so, like, we fast forward to us and what we're doing. Our work is kind of two parts, right? Like, it's an awareness and kind of an exploration and even a processing of like the what has happened, right? Because we're not responsible for like what happened, but we are responsible to come into like the awareness of what we want to be able to do with it, right? And our work then is to process like what that means for us to do our work and process and grieve, right? Because in some regards, there's like a loss of childhood, there's a loss of innocence, there's a loss of so much,
Mhm.
right? And so like there's a process of grieving that and the awareness of um just because of some of what has happened to us, right? Like, we are forever changed. And our responsibility then goes and then turns into like the work of like modeling, right? What emotional vulnerability, emotional awareness, self-awareness, right? And all these things are for our children, because let's be honest, I mean, you got a young person in their 20s, and then, these, I would even just, we're calling them now the COVID babies, right? Or COVID
mm,
babies, right? They are so socially disconnected, right? So we've done all this work to now become emotionally aware. Now we got
mhm.
all this social disconnection that's also connected to emotional awareness. And it's like, we have to be able to like give this, and and I think this is where we're trying to like decode like the mechanism to make it happen, because we have all this social disconnection in a time where our emotional and social awareness is so important to be able to break down, right, the harms and the hurts, so we don't repeat what has happened. And I think that's kind of the intersection that we're faced with right now, is we're trying to break down the things that have happened, because we are in this, I don't know, I guess you can say kind of an age of awareness. But where we are, right, I think we're figuring out like what our work is, because it does feel like a lot for like this span and this kind of demographic of where we are on this call, like our work to decode that and lift and elevate this, because it's quite heavy. And I put my mind to think, I'm like, gosh, like how did we get to like where we are responsible for like deconstructing all of this and making sense to like kind of create, right, I don't know whether it's a period of enlightenment or what it's going to turn into, because I think we're just at the very beginning of like what this is going to look like. But it's a lot of emotional awareness, it's a lot of self-awareness, and a lot of coming into, as we think about what that looks like.
Yeah, I love all of that, and I guess maybe picking up and maybe even going adjacent left and right here with this is that when you witness something,
Mm-hmm.
particularly if we think about the example that you gave, Adam, which is when you're young, right?
Mhm.
You're struggling with things that you have no words for. So, Rosina, when you talked about that terminology,
Mm-hmm.
you have no words for that. Like, who's right or who's wrong? You have no idea what they're fighting about. You don't understand the words. You don't understand the language that they're using, right? You hear it, but you're missing so much context about who they both are, where they are in that particular point, what's the root cause of the thing that they're not even aware of. Like, so you're getting the results of them not even being aware, to something Rosina said, not even having their language. Then
Mm-hmm.
when you get into the context of, well, that's my mom and my dad.
Mm-hmm.
Who do I side with?
Yeah.
Because that inevitably comes sort of in there. And even when I think about who do I side with, not even right or wrong, do
Yeah.
I go and give my dad sympathy first or my mom? And I don't even know what that looks like, because I don't even know what I'm going through. So
Mm-hmm.
even with everything that Rosina said, one of the things I like to sort of talk about and sort of think about is that this piece that Rosina is talking about, this is the live situation for us all, is that all of these things are happening all right now.
All at once.
To Adam, to your point, you don't know at what point that thing is going to
Yeah.
trigger and it's going to go, hey, wait, what's this thing, right? And so as you're thinking about this, we do not become adults without going through
Mm-hmm.
this period of not even having words and terminology. And I don't think there's enough given for that, because when you do start to get words, some of the first things that they try to do is to stop you from using words you hear them use.
Mm-hmm.
Don't use these cuss words. Oh, you said 50, 11 times today. Of course I'm going to pick this up. Or I'm picking up your favorite song because you're playing it all the time. And you telling me I'm too young to know it. Well, I'm just repeating what I heard.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when you get older, you've repeated it so many times. Now that you know what it means, you start to bring a different level of attachment to it, and not even knowing why.
Mhm.
Because all you know is this song was played, and now this sort of piece comes together, right? And so when you think about, one of my grandparents' favorite song was "Taxi, Take Me to the Other Side" by Jay Blackfoot. It's about taking the dude to
Mhm.
the other side of town for his other girl. Right? I grew up going, man, this is the song, and I'm going, this song was straight. My grandparents was straight traveling. So y'all are jamming to somebody calling a taxi to go to the other side of town for their baby. Like, guys, what? Like, so there's these things where you sort of unpack it and you go, man. And so it's really hard for us to, Rosina, something you're saying. Our parents, if you think about maybe our great grandparents,
Mm-hmm.
who, let's say, uh, post pre civil rights,
Mm-hmm.
right? Before that traction started, they had no sense of integration ever being a thing.
Nope.
They
Yeah.
had kids who fought for, and integration became a thing for them, right? And so maybe fought for civil rights and integration became a thing. Then we become the kids who get the benefit of whether or not you can go to college is not whether or not there's an integration thing, right? We get the benefit from that. But at the same time, we also get dropped in technology. which our parents had no clue of, and even still now,
Nothing.
we're much better than
Yeah.
our parents with technology, right? And so they didn't have the tools, they didn't have the research, they didn't have the literature. Then we got all this education. What's the first thing our parents do? This education don't make y'all think y'all know everything. That's the first thing. As soon as we got it, they started to tell us it don't make y'all smarter than me. So now we've got all of these. Y'all sent us to get smart, sent us to get these tools, and now y'all telling us don't try this with you because they ain't one of your little students. So right, this stuff, right, and it made sense now when I think about it. They were saying to us, don't try to apply this stuff you went and learned from some textbook, because the stuff that I'm telling you is based on what I actually lived and went through. So even when we think about maladaptive, I can look back now and go, there's a lot of behaviors and a lot of guidance that they gave me that is actually maladaptive in its practice. But given what they gave me at the time, that was the best thing smoking. You got a job at a factory, you put your head down, you work, you showed up consistently, and maybe you got that next level job that you was able to do something for your family. So, Coach, I know you said 3 minutes, but this is one of those ones where when you start to think about that, because it really gets into what I think is the heart of relevant right now for every single person.
For sure.
Rosina, every time you talk about that sort of self-awareness, I keep coming back to that is the one thing we're not taught. Our parents don't teach us how to be self-aware. The education system does not teach us. It's not until we get into the corporate workspace that they start telling you, well, you need to be aware of how your actions impact other people that you work with. What the hell y'all talking about? This ain't been no thing. I've been the student I was able to be without having to worry about the impact of other people's students. The person who was going for valedictorian is not worried about the person who's at the bottom of the. They're going, I got to get the highest grade. So all of a sudden, there's this shift from you being the individual superstar to now all of a sudden you need to be a part of a winning team, a winning organization. And we struggle with that because of everything that we're talking about now. Even your parents. Nobody tells us as a kid, you got to be part of a successful team. We say you got to do all of this, which makes relationships complicated because they don't give us tools early on. In fact, they forbid us to get in relationships until we get old enough. Well, what am I supposed to do between now and then, right? And so all of us, and Roseanne, I love when you talk about this, we all went through a period of time where we one decision away, but at that, even with that one decision away, even with what we all know right now, I actually think we all sit on this sort of fence of awareness that enrages us and awareness that brings us peace. And so you've got to have some discernment even right there about what you allow in to this very conversation, because we have no idea what's going to be that thing that you was like, all of a sudden you off and running for something and when you spend time and maybe 6 months later, you be like, man, shit, my grandparents used to do this thing that I did. I didn't realize it at the time, but now that I've done it, I can see it in the context, right? And now the whole thing shifts because now we can see our behavior of something we repeated that somebody else did. And now we see that the outcomes don't match and we go, yeah, this don't serve me. And so, but we don't have the tools to say that or figure out if it don't serve me, how do I not use it again?
That part.
So yeah, lots to go on there.
We can go down that one for a little
bit. That's exactly. Yeah.
I saw you processing it. You know, it was nice. I really enjoyed that. In terms of we're gonna go to the next question, but I think when I was thinking as you were speaking, Professor, and some of the gems you gave, Rosina, it made me think of the bank that my mom worked for, that she was just totally miserable. She retired out that place. You know, and you know, I'm a big believer that imposter syndrome erases progress, and I felt like it erased a lot of her progress.